Welcome to my Thursday live stream, where we talk about photography and catch up on what's new and what I've been up to, what you guys have been up to. Let me know if you guys can all see and hear me okay. I need to get my chat window up so I can see what you're saying. 1 second. Oh, there it is. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. It's already way after 10 o'clock. I'm late as usual. But I was trying to find some stuff because I've been busy this week. A lot of different things. Uh, One is just an update. I am recovering from this muscle spasm and herniated disc in my neck. It's getting better. I still have to take, Motrin, a couple times a day, but it's less than it was last week. So that's good. Um, Again, it's a problem. I need to fix my posture, I think. It just happened to coincide with my booster and flu shot. Like I got 2 shots 10 days ago. And I mean, the very next day I had typical flu shot symptoms. And it just coincided with that. So I didn't know if they were related or not, but I think they're not related. I think it was just a coincidence that uh, I'm having this problem again. So anyhow, that's that. And then, but this week, okay, so uh, we had an Imaging USA conference just down the street from me. And I just, it started much earlier, but I couldn't go because of this, I'm trying to recover from this, right? I was still sick. So I couldn't go to any of the pre-con stuff. I really wanted to go to Joe Edelman's uh, class. It was like an all-day class, and it was great, I'm sure, but I missed it. So I went Sunday with David Crooks, and um, I could only stay like an hour, 2 hours because we had a snowstorm, and I can't. The roads were so bad. Getting there was fine, but in 2 hours there was like an inch of snow on the highway, and it was so cold. The salt wasn't working, so it took almost what should have been like a 10-minute drive took me a half an hour to get home that day. Fortunately, I did make it home at least, because there was like a 20-hour backup the last time it snowed. Oh, so Sunday was kind of a bust, and I haven't been to a conference like in 20 years. I used to go to conferences back when I was doing my other business. So I was just kind of like just lost. I went there and everything was so overwhelming. And this is like Joe was saying, this is about a third the size it normally is. And I got lost. My focus was on, because when I used to go 20 years ago, the focus was always on getting swag, right? All kinds of neat little gadgets and things. And they didn't really have that here. There was very, very slim on swag. I did get a couple of things, but nothing like pens and notepads. Just minor things like that. I did get one mug, and that was after I sat there and talked to them for like 15 minutes. Um, so I got a mug, and I did get a skull cap. I lost it now. Where is it? This is my bag. This is my swag bag from Imaging USA. But I got lots of great information from some of the vendors. But my biggest regret really was I didn't go to all of the classes. They were sponsoring classes morning and evening. But so Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, they had classes like that I could go to, and speakers and all of that. Oh, here's my mug. Just a coffee mug. I don't know. I'll add it to my collection. I've probably got a dozen of these things. And of course, all kinds of flyers. I got some for my buddy Walter. But this is a good magazine. I need to go through this a little bit more. But that's it for swag. Nothing. Maybe a few buttons. I got some buttons that were kind of silly. I mean, it's kind of stupid, right? It's like, this says stay wild, so I'm going to give that to a friend of mine. No Bones Day, something related to dogs. I don't know. I'm not into flair. Remember the movie Office Space, and they were talking about flair. I'm not into these things so much. But I can give it to my friends or kids that I see when the opportunity comes. Whoops. I can't believe I can't buy it. It was a skull cap and it said Zeiss on the front. That was the best thing I got. And now I lost it already. I was wearing it the other night. But I did make it to at least one class. And it was about portrait photography for, my mic is not good. The sound's a little echoey. Okay, let me see if I can click some option here. Maybe I can, I can't plug it in over there. Let me do something real quick with the mic because I don't want people to sit through a live stream where I sound like crap, right? So give me 30 seconds to correct this. Testing. Testing 1 2. All right, there we go. All right, how's that? Hopefully that sounds better. Yeah, thanks, Rick. So I did go to one class, a portrait session. Not a portrait session, but about people with different skin tones. And I made a lot of notes. They're in my bag here about doing portraits. So people that have very dark skin tones, and then very light skin tones, and doing mixed race type couples. You have a lot of international type couples that you might shoot for. So how do you account for that when you do your photography? And there was a few good tips there, but the bottom line was you need light. just have bring flash or some kind of lighting, and make sure that they're illuminated enough so they're not silhouetted if they have dark skin, and then take some consideration about the background. It was very, very basic. So I definitely learned some new things. But it was, they were basically common sense type things. It wasn't like tips and tricks kind of thing. Like, oh, I didn't know that. It was like, oh, that makes. It was more like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but you're right. So if you really think it through, uh, if you're a competent photographer and you think it through, you can probably address any challenge, right, with lighting or whatever it might be, whatever challenge there is in photography. If you're a competent photographer and you think it through, you'll be able to overcome it. Uh, but there was a lot of questions there, because they had a Q&A session afterwards, and they were hitting her with questions that were not related to her presentation. Not, there were a lot of good questions, but some of them were just not related, like RAW versus JPEG or uh, things like that. And I'm like, this is about lighting people with different skin tones, not about RAW versus JPEG or what's the difference between Adobe RGB and sRGB. And a lot of photographers, they're excellent photographers, like she was, or she is, I should say. And but they're not super technical or mathematical or scienceical, whatever. They know how to do photography. They know their craft. They understand lighting and composition, and they know their gear, right, to the extent that they need to. But a lot of photographers, they don't get into this nitty gritty, like, every setting and how does, what is, like, what's the dynamic range of your camera. It's important to know what your camera's limits are, but you don't need to know an exact number. Like my camera's 12 stops, mine is 14 stops, So uh, those questions I found a little bit of annoying to me as a just as an attendee. I'm like, why are you asking her that? But she handled it well, and she was a great presenter. I wish I could remember her name. I have it written down over there, but and I did learn some, it got me to think more, which I think is the best thing that you can get from a class, is make you think, right? Because somebody can just tell you it, tell you an answer or give you a tip, but it's only going to work in a very specific situation sometimes, right? You have to be able to think and solve problems, and that's one of the main things I got from that uh, presentation. Was it got me thinking, right? And that's what I need to do, I think, more in my presentations and tutorials, is not maybe be so specific about, if you have this specific problem, do this. It's more about making you think a little bit more. What is the sort of spirit that you're trying to capture, not so much what is it technically you're trying to capture. What is the spirit of it? What is the story? What is the essence of what you're trying to do with your photography? And uh, that's one of the things I kind of picked up from it. So I took a lot of notes, not only about the techniques for doing um, international type portraiture, but also I took a lot of notes about her presentation. How did she present things? How did she make it? Because it was very entertaining, right? Um, and informative, and the way she portrayed her information was really excellent. So that's the other side of it for me, as also a quote unquote teacher. I learned a lot on both sides of the presentation itself, but also the content that she portrayed. Um, so for me, my thinking is, it just comes down to lighting. I mean, long story, take a 2-hour presentation. It just comes down to lighting. That's what her presentation was about. But uh, like I said, it got me thinking, though, a lot. It got me thinking a lot. So I'm going to try and reach out to her and share or convey my impressions, if she cares. But just to thank her for her time personally, for doing that presentation. Hopefully she'll catch my email, but I don't know. So let me catch up with who's here. Um, Wow, a lot of comments already. So going to the top, Annette, good to see you. Ooh, it's snowing. We're supposed to get a little snow today, but I don't think it'll snow. It looks like it's just rain. And Lassie's here, good. And Plato, Marcia, good to see you from Florida. Oh, I'm so jealous. And Jim Cusman, good to see you from Ohio. Wow. And let's see. Barry, always good to see you. 39 degrees Fahrenheit. It's about the same here right now. That's why I don't think it's going to snow. But by tonight, it's supposed to get down to 18, and then it's only going to be a high of like 20 degrees tomorrow. So we got a little cold front coming in. John Yutze, good to see you. Jonas, good to see you. David Hill from Hillsy, and Archer Escudo, what's up? And let's see. See if we have any questions. Oh, Music Sound Gear is here. I answered your question in the comments about the flash. Hopefully you understood, but I think it was you, Music Sound Gear. Someone had asked a question about. I just posted a video this morning on a real estate job that I did, and I put a flash on top of my camera, my Godox V1, and then I had a handheld flash, the 8200. And the question was, are you using the flash on the camera low power just to trigger the other flash? And the answer is no. The flash on the camera is a radio trigger, so it does trigger the off-camera flash, but I'm using the light from both flashes because the light is additive. So they're both pointing at the same spot. Sometimes I point the on-camera flash down a little bit to spread the light out more in front. But primarily I want the light source to be coming from the same place so that if I get shadows, I'm not getting multiple shadows that I have to deal with. So that's why I normally point the flash in one place when I'm doing my photography, for real estate photography. And if I do need a little more light in a different area, I can point the on-camera flash down to the area that's not getting enough light, but I'm still very conscious of the shadows that might be going on because it's very hard to correct for shadows in post-processing. It's a big headache, trust me. But okay, that was that. And Rick is here, of course. And let's see. Hopefully the microphone is better. When I get down to that part of the chat, I'll find out. Yeah, it's really cold. It's going to be much colder today, Marcia. Croquet is asking, when is a new sensor for OM43 coming out? Give us some thoughts and news. How old is the current sensor anyway? Well, I can tell you the current sensor is many, many years old. I think it came out with the EM1 Mark II, which that camera came out in 2016. I don't think, the Pen F had a 20 megapixel sensor also, but technically it's not the same. For all intents and purposes, it's the same sensor. And quickly to answer your other question, I don't know when another sensor is coming out. I know there's new sensors on Sony's website that are micro four thirds format that have, more modern tech on it, like BSI. It's backside illuminated, and it has some other things. Ben Chappell is a better person to ask. He's more conscious of the technology on the sensors themselves. But overall, okay, the sensors are made from a silicon wafer disk, right? Let's just back up. They're made from a silicon wafer disk, and you can buy, companies that manufacture microchips or sensors. You can buy very high quality ones that are very specific for photography, and you can buy lower grade quality ones that might be for some basic electronics. But you buy these high quality ones generally for photography, and they can cost $5,000, $10,000, per disc. And how many chips you can put onto a single disc, or how many sensors you can make out of a single disc, is directly proportional to the sensor size, right? So Micro Four Thirds are smaller, so you can probably put a few hundred or create a few hundred chips, sensors from one disk, whereas a full frame, you might only be able to create, 30 or 40 sensors off a single disk. So the cost per sensor is much higher the larger the sensor is. I mean, exponentially. Uh, for two reasons, not only because of the surface area differences, but also because of the defect rate. You have a higher defect rate with smaller numbers, right? Um, so if the wafer is supposed to have 100 sensors on it, like you can fit 100 sensors on it, and I'm just pulling these numbers out of my head. They're not real numbers, but there might be a defect rate of 2%. So out of 100 sensors that you make on a disk, 2 might be bad. So you have to build that into the cost of the sensor. And if you have 400 sensors on a plate and your rate's 2%, that number's that would be a high number. Your defect rate probably goes down the more that you can put onto a single plate. Now with that out of the way, so basically what I'm alluding to is that no matter who makes the sensor, they're probably using the same silicon platter, whatever that's made out of, right, to make the sensor, and they're just cutting different sizes. So our Micro Four Thirds sensor probably has the same sensitivity and to light as a full frame sensor before they put any electronics on top of it, because then they layer the wires on top, right, or on the bottom, depending if it's backside illuminated or regular CMOS front sided, and then they add the glass on top, right? The infrared filters, the focusing sensors, or electronics and wires, and then the RGB array, or the Bayer array, or in Fuji's case it'd be whatever theirs is, I forget. So they layer this all on top, and then that's going to affect ultimately how much light is hitting the sensor, right? And the image quality from the sensor. So smaller sensors, the wires laying over the top of the sensor is reducing the amount of light hitting the actual CMOS, right? This, what is it? Semi-metal oxide, semi-carbon metal? I don't know what CMOS stands for, but that's going to be the same. It's just the stuff they layer on top is going to reduce the light hitting that CMOS, and that's going to reduce the sensitivity. And that's why even smaller sensors, they're not as sensitive just from pure physics, right? It's not so much about surface area. It's more about the electronics and stuff that go on top, and then mitigating that with wires, because the wires that go across the top actually are the pixels, because the CMOS is one pixel, and then you layer wires on top of it like this, and then you get the individual pixels from the individual wires and how that all reads. So it goes from the wiring on top of the sensor or on the back if it's backside illuminated, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm laying this foundation because the sensors that you find in the Panasonic Micro Four Thirds 20 megapixel sensors, the sensors that you find in the PenF, which is a 20 megapixel sensor, and then the EM1s, right? They're probably all cut from the same silicon wafer, but the wiring and stuff that they lay on top of it is different. But ultimately, the image quality is almost identical between all the different sensors. So even though they come out with a new sensor, if it's using the same technology, basically the same, like if it's not backside illuminated, it's not really going to give you any better image quality from the raw data itself, right? They can always do some conversion, right? They have the AD converters and stuff that process the raw data and you get a cleaner image. But ultimately, the physics, the raw physics and electronics coming out of the sensor itself are basically the same. So what I'm saying is the 20 megapixel sensor in the Pen F is probably identical to the 20 megapixel sensor in the EM1 Mark II and III, even though they might have different part numbers. The only difference is how they're laying the wires down to work with the electronics in the camera. And a lot of cameras, they have bigger sensors, APS-C and full frame. Technically, they would have the same image quality because it's the same CMOS material. It's just how they're laying the wires down and then doing that conversion process. So new sensors, even though they come out with a new sensor, right? Let's say 30 megapixel, 40 megapixel, micro four thirds sensor. Ultimately, the image quality is not going to be significantly better from the sensor itself because it's using the same CMOS wafer material, right? It's just how they lay the wires and everything, and that all plays a role. The micro lenses. You can read like 1,000 white papers on it. Ultimately, even if they come out with a new sensor, it's not going to be much better unless there's some significant. It may be better in some areas. Let's say they make it backside illuminated. That's a difference in technology, but it's the same CMOS material. But because of the technology they're using by putting the wires on the back of the micro lenses and stuff so that it doesn't interfere with light hitting the CMOS, you get a little better light performance, right? That's why a lot of like cell phone cameras and compact cameras all have BSI sensors, and they've had for years and years, right? Before a lot of cameras had backside illuminated sensors. Another significant technology is having a stack sensor where they put the digital readers, it reads the data directly off the sensor, off the back of the sensor, instead of pushing all the data off the sensor to be read onto a chip on the side. They put a lot of micro sensors or microchips on the sensor itself. Hence, they stack these microchips onto the sensor. And so that now that the electrons from the sensor don't have to travel as far all the way across the sensor, they only have to travel maybe 1/10 of the way, right? So that's why stack sensors have less rolling shutter and stuff, because it's able to read the sensor much faster because the electrons don't have to travel as far. And that's sort of where we're at right now. But regardless of what they say, ultimately, until there's a core change in the technology, the CMOS material itself, unless there's some core change there, I don't see sensor tech changing or improving much in our cameras and getting better image quality, right? And that's why I can take my EM10 Mark 1. You can take any camera, Mark 1 camera, the first EM5, the first EM10s that came out, and you're going to get very similar image quality than you would from a brand new EM1 Mark III, because the core underlying sensor technology and material, the CMOS, has not changed, right? In the last, 10 or 20 years, however long they've been making them, has not changed. It's the same thing. It's just they have gotten better at some of the electronics that go on top, the micro lenses, the filters. Sometimes they get rid of the the anti-aliasing filter, so you get a little more light, a little more sharpness. They do things, but like I said, the core thing is the CMOS. So for me, okay, so they come out with a new sensor, right? Let's say the EM1 Mark IV, we'll just call it that. They come out with a new sensor. If it's still a CMOS sensor, I'm not going to get too excited about that. They might claim like a one-stop improvement in light gathering, right? In the image. But that's all after the sensor has taken the light. It's just the processing that they do to give you that better performance, right? Which is always good. But Don't expect too much, even if they get a new sensor. Is the bottom line, unless there's some core change in the sensor tech itself. Like having a stack sensor, they don't get better image quality, but they have a faster read rate, so you get less rolling shutter. Hence, the Nikon Z9 uses a stacked BSI sensor, and that's why they have no shutter now, because they're able to read that sensor fast enough because of the stacking of the microchips on the sensor itself. Uh, that's a change in tech, but that's not a core change in technology, because the noise performance is very similar to the D850. It's not like leaps and bounds better. It's pretty much the same because they're using the same CMOS material. Anyway, my camera moved a little bit. I'm like sitting in the corner. Anyway, so hopefully I explained that, and that's kind of understood. But yeah, the old sensor technology. When somebody says something is old, I would argue that, and I'm sorry, let me show you the question he had. I would argue that sensor tech is still 15 years old. However long it's been coming out, they've been making CMOS sensor. I would argue that the technology in any camera, modern camera today, is still 15 years old, because the core CMOS material is the same, right? There's different qualities and grades that they make these wafers from, of course, but that hasn't changed. And that's why I can take a 10-year-old camera and get very similar image quality to a modern camera. Like my E500 is a 8 or 10 megapixel camera, and the wafer, the CMOS material, is the same as the one in my EM1 Mark III. And when you compare the two, at base ISO, the image quality is very similar, but because they laid the wires on top differently, right? You only get 10 megapixels out of the E500, you get 20 megapixels out of the EM1 Mark III. Where they start to separate and where people say, oh, look how much better the EM1 Mark III is at high ISO, that's all off of the sensor. That's nothing to do with the sensor itself. That's all the processing they do off of the sensor. The AD converters, the whatever software engineering that they do off the sensor, most of that is due to off the sensor type technology, not with the sensor itself. So I bet they could take the sensor out of my E500, and if they put it into the M1 Mark III and rewired it so it would work, you would get very similar image quality out of that at high ISO. Okay, so I'm not an engineer, okay? So take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm not an electrical engineer or a sensor designer. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. So I have to give you that caveat. But when I was researching all of this and reading about how they make sensors and electronics and things, these are the kind of things that I extrapolated from all of these white papers and research that I did. And there's a couple of viewers that come in the chat sometime that are electrical engineers, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some sensor designers that come into the chat once in a while. I don't know, or have a background in that can correct me if I'm wrong, right? I have no problem with that. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But that's what I was able to extrapolate with my limited knowledge. And I'm trying not to use. I'm not trying to make any assumptions, right? I'm basing from what I read. Now, if I've interpreted what I read incorrectly, then I'm sorry, But anyhow, let me. So, I am excited to get a new sensor for more megapixels, so we get more resolution. Because I shoot at base ISO most of the time if I want good quality, right? But I don't know anything more than anyone else. I go to 43rumors.com and see if there's anything there about new sensors coming out. Maybe you can check the Sony's website and see what new sensors they have in the Micro Four Thirds format. but I really don't know. So, but old calling a sensor old, I think it needs to be. Um, it's to me, it's kind of a myth or misnomer. It's not accurate to say that this is old sensor technology. It's not the sensor itself; it's the technology around it. The that handle the data coming off of it. Oh, Roberto's here. Good to see you. John follows. And George Mooring. Yeah, live chat. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry I didn't do Tuesday. Uh, time. Wow. I'm 30 minutes behind on the chat. I'm going to catch up here after this comment. I'm going to go back to Thursday, Sundays, I think, uh, instead of doing Tuesdays and occasional Thursdays. Because what happened this Tuesday is I had a photo job, and I just couldn't do the stream. And then we had the convention that I went to afterwards. So, and I posted the vlog for the photo job, but that's why I couldn't do Tuesdays. And this happens more often than not. If I miss a Tuesday, it's mostly because I have a photo job, or some other engagement, right? Appointment for something. So Sundays I'm usually free. The reason I stopped doing Sundays is because the photo club that I joined, David Crooks, has photo walks on Sundays, and I'd go early in the morning to the photo walk, and then I'd have to hustle back here to do the stream. And I said, I don't have to do them Sundays. I can just do them on Tuesdays. But now that work is kind of coming in again, I feel like it's better to be a little preemptive. So with that said, look out for this coming Sunday. I'm going to have Peter Forsgaard on. And then the following Sunday, I'm going to have the 4th annual Micro Four Thirds online meetup with 6 other great photographers. Of course, Peter, Jimmy, Robin, Maddie, Joe Edelman. But I also going to have Ben Chappell here as well. So he's a new add to the group this year for the online meetup. So hopefully that works. That should be great. That's going to be great. So we're going to talk about Micro Four Thirds, the industry changes, things we'd like to see come in the future, and just overall thoughts on Micro Four Thirds. Okay, let me catch up on the chat real quick. Gigafish, good to see you. He's asking, did I meet any YouTube star? Well, Joe Edelman was there. Supposedly Jared Polin was there, but I didn't see him. And I'm sure there were many more. But everybody had a mask on, so it was really hard to recognize anybody at the show as it was because of that. And I didn't stay that long on Sunday because of the snow, and then Monday I had to rest because even now it's very distracting, this pain in my neck. Short answer is not really. Joe Edelman, definitely, but nobody else that I knew. Okay, so the audio is much better. Might be out of sync though, the lip syncing. Let me see. Rick says, it's my belief that the traditional 35 millimeter film had different color balance depending on the local skin tone. So think about choosing different film emulation in post-processing. Now, the way I understand it with film is that different film stocks are sensitive to, more or less sensitive to various colors. So some films might be more sensitive to red, and or render it differently than another film stock. Um, so I think what I would do if I was really serious about getting the color act, because I do a white balance adjustment when I did my last portrait thing. I just use a gray card. But I think if you're really serious about getting the correct, um, accurate color, you really have to use a color checker and calibrate your camera to your software. um, with that said, but going back to the seminar presentation that I was at, what was very interesting is she says, ask your clients to describe their skin tone to you. What do ask them what they think their color skin is. And then you want to try and match that when you're doing your post processing. So if somebody says, yeah, I'm kind of a milk chocolate kind of color, that's how I feel. Or maybe they might say, I'm kind of an olive, color. So sometimes you don't want to be accurate. You want to represent what they think their skin tone, because who's going to know better than the person themselves, right? So I thought that was kind of interesting. But um, yeah, color balance in film, I noticed also when I shoot film, it's not as sensitive to white balance as our digital cameras. It seems to handle it better. Like, I'm not going to get very cold tones on film, or it's not going to be as cold on film as it would be in digital. Digital is very sensitive. Um, Now, granted, I'm not a heavy film shooter, so I'm just going off the few rolls that I've shot and did these comparisons directly between my digital camera and my film camera, because I would take the same picture, one with film, one with digital, and do that comparison. And that was one of the observations I made, was that it was not quite as sensitive to white balance either. So if you're shooting in a studio with film, I can see where you should be able to get a matched, because you can buy film stock in different white balance calibrations too, right? So yeah, film is interesting. I just finally finished a roll of my Hasselblad. I'm going to try and develop it today uh, myself. I got the chemicals. We'll see. Cross my fingers. My audio is off sync. I'm sorry. I'm going to try and fix the syncing issue. I had it fixed, but the problem is it had a couple glitches. Um, Sometimes refreshing your browser fixed the lip syncing issue, but not always. Gigafish met Jen Poth. I don't know who that is, but it's cool when you go to events. Sometimes you meet somebody, right? Like, nobody recognized me there, so I'm small fry, Other than Joe, he knew me, but and John Matthews says, Will Crockett had an interesting video about face mask in portraiture. Oh, okay. I have to make a note of that. Let me see. I have to write it down. This is a habit I've picked up. Is I write everything down now. I remember it better. I have to show you a couple other things from the show too. Um, Will Crockett, YouTube, face masks. Okay. All right. Oh, hi, Christine. How are you? I'm so far behind on the chat. I'm still 20 minutes behind. Let me catch up here. Yeah, and this is yeah, cameras are really good. So Steve Page is saying cameras are so good now. What you see is what you get. So all we need to do is like what you see is then take the shot. Most camera geeks have no idea how to take a decent image. Yeah, and that's the other problem I see is if you're there's people that are focused on the gear and they enjoy that, and then there's people that are focused on the craft itself and getting good images. Um, of course, we all look at gear and we all look at getting better images, right? As photographers, but some people are more focused on the gear and getting images from the gear than they are getting images, good images, right? Or learning the craft and learning light and everything. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, right? We all have our different interests and how we enjoy our hobby, right? Um, I probably enjoy the gear a little bit too much because I have so much of it, but I do enjoy the craft, right? Experiencing different levels of photography, like going into film was really awesome for me. I really enjoy that. But taking picture with different kinds of cameras, I enjoy that. Like the Nikon DF was great. I love shooting with that. Um, there are senior moment. I was going to make a profound statement. Now I can't remember it. uh, there's nothing's going to replace my Olympus gear right now or in the foreseeable future because the one is my muscle memory and everything is so tuned into it now. I can take that camera and get it to do anything I want, you know. But also, I love the ergonomics. I love how they look, so it inspires me to take the camera out. Uh, everything about Olympus just makes my hobby and my craft more enjoyable, more so than any other brand that I've tried or have or own. Like I have a Panasonic S5, takes phenomenal pictures, but it's a brick. I'm not going to take that out for photography. It's purely a tool that I use for video work in some of my pro jobs, paid work, right? The Nikon DF, I think, is a beautiful camera. It inspires me to take it out. Um, but it's still not quite as good as the Olympus, in my opinion, in terms of, how I enjoy the craft. And certainly not in features and functions, right? So it never replaced any professional work that I would ever do, and it wasn't designed to, right? It's a toy camera, really. Oh, that's interesting. A press event on the 24th. Okay. Hopefully they announce the new camera. Oh, Marco, it's okay. I'm still catching up on chat. I'm 30 minutes behind again. Every time I start to jibber jabber about something, I get behind. Oh, David's got to go to school. Okay, Dave. I know you left a half an hour ago, but thanks for dropping in. To improve my portrait, I'm thinking of adding a TT600 and a TT350. Any thoughts? Just portraits of family and friends. Yeah, those are great. Those are great flashes. You can use the TT350 to trigger the TT600 off camera. So get a light stand and a white umbrella, right? And you'll be set. That's a great combination. I'm pretty sure, let me just double check though. I'm pretty sure the TT600 does have radio capability. Built-in 2.4 gigahertz radio system. Yeah, so you should be fine. You should be fine. I'm looking at this right here. So it'll work with the TT350 because they're both using the 2.4 gigahertz X radio system. That's really cheap. $65. Let me just integrate, incorporate a wireless triggering, set up as a master or slave. Yeah, it looks good. I mean, I don't own that flash, so I can't tell you firsthand. But it's a full size flash. Let's see, uses 4 AA batteries here, so it's going to have about double the power as the TT350. So that's the one you want to use in the umbrella stand. So you'll be good. Yep, that looks good. Anyone using OI Share? I've tried numerous times. So what I learned, one tip you can try, Marcia, is put your phone in airplane mode and then turn on the Wi-Fi and see if it'll connect that way. So the Wi-Fi is the only thing on. Like turn off the Bluetooth, just connect with Wi-Fi. Now, if you have a newer camera that uses the Bluetooth, I haven't tried that. Maybe try to connect Wi-Fi only. If that doesn't work, turn on the Bluetooth. If your camera has Bluetooth, like the EM1 Mark III and the EM5 Mark III, they have Bluetooth connectability as well. But try Wi-Fi first, and put your phone in airplane mode, and then turn on one thing at a time. That's the only tip I can give. And Barry says, since the demise of my EM10 Mark II, against your advice, I now have a new Mark III. Okay, for $265 or pounds, which I thought was a pretty good price. All okay so far. If you find her much cleaner, yeah. I mean, it's a fine camera. You know, it just doesn't have the basically like silent shutter. I think you have to do it in advanced shutter mode. Like there's a couple of glitches or a couple of things that it doesn't do that the EM1 Mark II did. The other thing was the custom settings, like the My Sets. It doesn't have any customizable settings, but those are not really deal breakers when it comes to doing photography and enjoying photography, right? Those are things that, as a professional, I really appreciate, right? Being able to do My Sets. And I used the M10 Mark II for years. Well, 2 or 3 years before I got the M1 Mark II. I used that camera professionally because of the My Sets. And actually, it was the EM10 Mark II that got me off of Nikon. I was using the Nikon D750 up till then. But yeah, congrats. It's a beautiful camera. I really like how it looks, much better than my EM10 Mark II. That's for sure. And Andrew got a 30 millimeter 3.5 macro. Awesome. I still got my eye on that lens. You probably got it for like under $200 too, right? That I'm still tempted myself. And continuing from my previous comment, camera manufacturers have a huge cost problem in introducing new sensor because every lens will need new in-camera software. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of R&D, right? Development, not just the sensor, but the lenses. Um, they have to make sure it works well. They have to make sure all the software works with the new sensor and all of the current existing lenses, and they have to design future lenses, right? So definitely. Yeah, and what I was ranting on about earlier, John Yutze summed it up in one sentence. There's more changes in software than hardware. So I talked what for about 20 minutes, and John Yutze summed it up in one sentence there. Oh, Randy's here and Lauren's here. How you guys doing? Good to have you. And I did get your emails, Lauren. Um, I just and I watched the video clips you gave me and stuff. So I just haven't had a chance to respond yet, but I will. But I know exactly what you mean about the conditions. I see it on the news a lot. You know where you are or surrounding near where you are, wherever. I'll respond in the email. And John says, "Thanks for explaining sensor tech. You're such a good teacher. Who cares if you gain an extra stop if you got?" Oh, yeah. Thanks. It's true though that the photo lab is pretty awesome. I'm having some issues with it. I know someone emailed me with the issues they were having with Photolab and how they corrected it. I forget who it was. But if you're here, I did get your email and I've read it, but I haven't had time to diagnose my own system the same way. But essentially, the problems that he corrected his problems with drivers to his video card. I think, long story short, I'll try and keep it down to one sentence because I'm so far behind. Uh, yeah, Gigafish says maybe we'll see with two ISO settings someday, just like two. No, I seriously doubt it. I seriously doubt it. We're always going to have ISOs. Uh, X-Tran is different than Bayer, but is it better in modern day camera? Well, I've seen a couple of different tests comparing Bayer with X-Trans. And ultimately, they were saying there's no difference in image quality. But X-Trans sensors, the problem is the I don't know what that process is called, but when they convert X-Trans raw data, you have to be able to demosaic it correctly. I think that's the right word. And not all software manufacturers demosaic the X-Trans sensors the same way. And some do it better than others. So I think Capture One is probably the best for Fuji, right? And I'm just speaking out of my butt here, really. But from what I've seen and heard, Capture One does the best job with converting Fuji raw images for image quality. But that was like a lifetime ago in terms of software. Maybe Adobe's doing a good job now. I don't know. I don't really shoot. I got to start shooting with my XT30 soon, but I don't shoot enough with Fuji and can do those comparisons. Oh, Larry Orr is here. Good to see you. And Randy's going to go off to the desert. I watched your Whistler videos. I watched the first one, then a little bit of the second one. But that's it. And Thomas is here. Hey, Thomas. Excellent new video on your recent business real estate job. I always pick up new tricks and hacks from these, applicable for not only works. Yeah. I mean, real estate photography, really any niche type kind of photography, you have to, you're going to use different skill sets. right? That can apply to other types of photography. I mean, there's some things in real estate photography I don't need to worry about. I don't have to worry about shallow depth of field. I have to avoid it, right? I have to think about hyperfocal distance a lot in real estate photography. And of course, I have to work with flash. Um, so in portrait photography, there's overlap there because you have to work with flash, but you use it very differently in portrait photography. But having the skill set of knowing how to use the flash, adjust the power, where to position it, all of that stuff converts over to portrait photography in a very similar way. Um, John Matthews has a trivia here. What is the only micro four third native lens solution under 150 grams capable of wider than 12 millimeter, yet has autofocus and wide aperture and a wider aperture than f2.8? Oh, because I was going to say the 9 to 18 millimeter, but when you said f2.8, that's a good question. It would have to be man, 150 grams though. It would have to be a Panasonic lens because I don't think any Olympus lens meets that criteria, and I'm not familiar with Panasonic lenses as much as I am Olympus. So Panasonic must have something wider than 12 millimeters, but only 150 grams. But 2.8, and it's probably 2.8 at the wide end, but at the long end, it's going to be like f5 or something, right? Because how can you make it 150 grams at f2.8 unless it's a variable aperture lens? So my guess is it's going to be a Panasonic with a variable aperture starting at f2.8. Because I don't think there's any Olympus lenses. That's the closest I can get. I can't get too specific because I'm not familiar with Panasonic, but Olympus doesn't have anything like that. So hopefully that's when I catch up in the chat. Let me know if I got it. And Rick says, don't forget 90% of photographers are amateur snapshots of family and friends. Yes, people are most likely to notice, complain if skin tone color is incorrect, even a quick family snapshot. Yes, and that's partially because our eyes and brains are trained for human faces, right? So we can spot somebody 100 yards away or 100 meters away and know that, hey, that's my son, that's my daughter, that's my grandfather. We can see that 100 meters away, right? So if we're doing a portrait or group shot, and everybody's right there, we're going to be extremely sensitive to skin tones, fine details, all of the things that make us be so good at recognizing human faces. All of that's going to come into play when they're right here in front of you, right in a picture. So that's why like in when you're doing portrait work, you have to be very sensitive to the skin tones and the fine details in the person, how the lights, casting shadows and things. Portrait work is a whole other niche, right? And a whole new skill set that you have to learn, both behind the camera, right? And off the camera with lighting, and then also interpersonal, working with the model or the talent or your friends and family. There's a whole slew of things there. It's a big area in photography, which is evident from when I went to the trade show. Most of the vendors there were about event photography, weddings, sports. like high school sports, senior portraits. Like 90% of the photography vendors there, that's what they focused on, right? That was their main thing. And anyway, yeah, it's a big field. But definitely Rick is right, but that has a lot to do with our how our brains are trained to recognize faces, and all of that comes into play: skin tone and fine details, right? Demeanor, motion, how people move. Sometimes you can tell who a person is just by the way they walk, right? So I know that guy because you recognize how they walk. And somehow I lost my place here on the chat. Here we go. I'm like the guy in Memento. I've never seen that show. I don't know. Memento. I don't know the reference. Yep, I've done that before, Randy. Just gone out with my cell phone. Not by choice, but I've gone on photo walks with my cell phone. And just love this game. Hello. And you always hear that gear doesn't matter to the extent that a good photographer can get good results with just about any camera. It's a valid point. So let's qualify this statement, right? Because that is a very common term where people say gear doesn't matter. Well, let me just say that if I got a $10,000 camera and another person has like a $500 camera, and you have the same skill set, right? You hand the okay. You take a very skilled photographer and you hand him two different cameras. He's going to get better results with the $10,000 camera than he will with the $500 camera, right? All things being equal, he's going to get better results. So in that case, gear does matter, right? But I think when people say gear doesn't matter, it needs to be in the context of you need to focus on your craft and develop your skill set so that you can take advantage of everything a camera has to offer, whatever that camera is. Because then at that point, really the gear doesn't matter. If you have a $10,000 camera or a $500 camera, if you have no skill set for photography, you're not going to get good images from either one, right? So I think it depends on the context of the conversation. Does gear matter or not? And clearly it does in some situations, depending on the person. In some situations it doesn't. So I think a better phrase to say is what's more important to you, right? Improving your skill set and your photography or having the best gear. For some people, it's having the best gear is more important because they enjoy that, and some people, it's about the photography, the skill set, the gear. You have professional photographers out there still using 10-year-old cameras if it's still working, and they only upgrade because they have to, because the camera that they're using failed, right? Because they know how to use it, and the most important thing to them is the final result, right? But for the most part, I say when gear doesn't matter, you have to qualify that a little bit more. The way you put it here, that it's a valid point for the most part, right? Because everybody's striving to be a better photographer, so you need to focus on that and not the gear. The gear doesn't matter. But like I said, if you give a professional, like a really good photographer, a $10,000 camera and a $500 camera, they're going to get better images with the $10,000 camera. So the gear does matter in that case. Anyway, that's how I would phrase it. And Stanislav is here. How you doing? I had a whole rant on sensors, old sensors, new sensors. You should watch that because you're kind of a technical guy, and you can leave a comment later what you think in the comments section. And Corn is here. How you doing? And Gigafish says thinking about the TT685, but for only some angles, bracketing and TCM. I don't know what TCM is. I mean, it when you're thinking about a TT, when you're thinking about a flash, right? You need to think about the entire system. If you're planning on expanding your flash photography, right? So the TT685 is probably a great flash. Again, it's not one that I own, but it's probably a fine flash. But are you buying it to use it on the camera only? Then I wouldn't recommend getting a TT685. I would probably get a TT350 because it's smaller, lighter, and has enough power for most things. But if you get a TT685 with a trigger, right? Now you can use the flash off camera, maybe on a light stand behind an umbrella or some other light modifier. Then at that point, that makes sense. Which I think you do a lot of portrait stuff, right? And you're wanting to kind of go hardcore. So don't just buy a TT685 by itself, right? You got to get a second flash that can work as a radio trigger and a secondary light, or at least get a radio trigger for it. You know, the X1 Pro is my favorite. At least get a radio trigger for it so you can use it off camera in situations where you need where you're going to do any kind of portrait photography. And then you can build on that from there because now you have a trigger and you have a flash, and Godox has a full lineup of lighting that work with that trigger system. And that's I think the way I would. So even though I don't know what you mean by TCM, I can tell you Godox has a solution for it. If you start with the 685 and the radio trigger, or a second flash that can act as a radio trigger, like get two 685s, that may be better, right? Than getting a 685 and a trigger. It'll cost a little bit more because the trigger itself is like $70. You might as well buy a second flash that can work as a trigger. Okay, so that's my answer there. Or not my answer, my opinion, I should say. Built-in ND filters rather than many ISOs. That wouldn't work either. I mean, if we lived on the sun, maybe, right? You could stack a bunch of ND filters to get a normal shot, then have them removed to let more light in. But here on Earth, you can't put ND filters in front of the current sensor tech. All the images will be too dark. Oh, John Truman came in. How you doing? Always good to see you, John. And Rob has a tip here from iShare about manually selecting it through the Wi-Fi setting of the phone is better than trying to connect through the app. I've had good luck with the app. Early on, that method worked for me though. But since they updated the app, I've been able to connect through the app no problem. But early on, connecting through the Wi-Fi, the camera's Wi-Fi app directly worked better. So that's another way to go. Oh, David's back from school. Wow, that was short. God, what time is it? Let's see. So I got that. And if I missed your question at this point, you're going to have to ask it again because I can't scroll back that far. I'm catching up though. Yeah. That was my experience. That was my experience early on when I started using the app. That I would connect through the phone's Wi-Fi app, then go to the iShare app, and it would connect immediately. But I haven't had that problem recently. I've been able to connect to the app directly. I don't know if that was because there's an update in the phone or because the app was updated, but I've been able to connect no problem. And then it says regarding Photolab, if you have an NVIDIA GPU in your system, install the latest driver and allow GeForce experience. Yeah, that was part of the conversation I had in the email with this other viewer. It was a driver issue, but I think he said he installed it outside of the GeForce experience. He was like, don't use the GeForce experience, install it directly. I'll have to read it again. It's been over a week, and I'm using the uh, not the standard gaming driver, but the other one. They have a media driver. It's not called media driver, but I'm using the other driver for creators and not the gaming driver. So should I be using the gaming driver and not the other media version? I don't know. But I've always installed through the GeForce Experience app myself. Um, oh, it recognized. Yeah, when I installed the last time I installed the driver, it didn't have Photolab in there. So I'll double check that. But my question is it the gaming driver I should install or the creator version? Yeah, the Whistler vids are just playing around. Yeah. And Steve Page likes the new Capture One Pro. Very good with Ollie images. First stage of edit, then move it to the next software use. Yeah, I know Walter Rowe. He does Capture One software, and he loves it. And he's also has a YouTube channel with just check out Walter Rowe Photography on YouTube. Excuse me. Um, and when I've used Capture One in the past, I was impressed with it, but ultimately, um, I went with Lightroom, Photoshop, and now I use Photolab for my personal stuff and professional. But on the professional side, I have to still use Photoshop. I can't use Photolab by itself for my pro work because of the image layering and things like that that I have to do. Okay, so we talked about the 24th, but Panasonic has one on the 23rd. And I talked to the guy, the Lumix guy at the trade show. I did vlog some of the trade show, the Imaging USA, so I'll try and edit that video later when I have some time and post it up so you guys can see. I think I did vlog him while I was talking to him. He didn't tell me nothing. He didn't tell me nothing. Um, anyway, I mean, obviously, maybe probably because he's not allowed to, but or Alawa. Oh, that's true. Back with the question was about an f2.8 or faster lens under 150 grams and wider than 12 millimeters for micro four thirds. I'm pretty sure my fisheye lens is more than 150 grams. I mean, I'm not trying to cheat and look it up because I assume you can look it up, but that's interesting. I didn't even think about third party. I was just thinking Olympus and Panasonic. But it's autofocus. I don't think the Laowas are autofocus. So that rules out Laowa, right? And I was trying to find it. There was a comment here. Cornice says the benefit of X trans is to get rid of color noise at high ISO. Okay. I mean, it does. They do produce very clean images. My Fuji. If it's because of the sensor, sure, why not? All right, let me rule out the fisheye lens. I have to look it up. Olympus 8mm f1.8. Let's see, specs. That's it for specs. BH Photo will have it. See, yeah, 315 grams. There's no way it's, yeah, definitely. I mean, 150 grams is super light. It's half the weight of that lens. I'm curious, who brought that question up? I forget. Perhaps I missed out on the earlier part, but Ari the Hasselblad, how do you feel about the camera? What will you mainly use it for? How does it handle? Oh, okay. Handling is very awkward compared to, like my EM5 Mark III, right? Because I'm used to grabbing a camera like this, so it's taking some getting used to. Here's my Hassie. Oh wait, you can't see me. Let me switch back. So, yeah, like your EM5s, you could get away with holding with one hand and take pictures, right? With this one, there's no way. Well, you could, but you have to hold the camera kind of the like with your left hand, and you would push the shutter, I guess, with this finger. But you can see right here that it has this lip here where your fingers go to hold the camera, and that's how you hold it. And it's heavy, right? Relatively speaking. So, how does it handle? It's very awkward, very different experience. And I only have the I do have the waist level finder here, so you have to kind of look down to compose. And then there's a magnifying glass in it that you can get critical focus, right? But I also have the viewfinder. If I had the viewfinder attached, then the handling would be a lot more natural, because I'm used to holding a camera like this and looking through a viewfinder. I have the viewfinder attachment in a drawer. In that sense, the handling will be very familiar. And then you manually focus, right? But setting the exposure is very different on this. I'll have to do a video about this camera and my experience with it. But the aperture and the shutter speed are linked together. So you can change in full stops with one click the aperture and the shutter speed at the same time. But then it's just weird. You have to adjust the aperture separately Uh, it's hard to explain the way the aperture and shutter speed work on this. They're linked, but they're not. And there's limitations, right? So you have to be very conscious of your shutter speeds, though, because it's limited to 1/500th of a second. So you have to be conscious of your shutter speed relative to the film that you put in. So if I put in ISO 400 film, it's very different than when I put ISO 100 film, the kind of exposures that I can get because my shutter speed is limited to 1/500th of a second. So there's a lot you have to think about. And you can also use much higher apertures, right? You can go to f16 and not have any diffraction because it's just film. You're not going to see it, you know? So it's a very, very different experience shooting that camera versus a digital camera, right? But the handling itself with a viewfinder attachment would be very familiar, composing and things. But working with the waist level finder, it's very different, but it's beautiful. It's so beautiful looking through this waist level finder. That's why I don't use the viewfinder this way, the eye level viewfinder. I don't like it. I like looking through the waist level viewfinder because it's just gorgeous. Even though it is harder to focus and compose this way, it's just a more fun experience for me to do it that way. Okay. But yeah, I love the camera. I love the camera. How do I feel? I love it because it's so different and so enjoyable because of the waist level finder. So I'm open to looking at other cameras now that are like TLRs and maybe a Bronica because of that waist level finder experience. But working with exposure uh, is very awkward on this camera. But I can get a Bronica, you know, that has auto exposure on it. You know, it'll do the exposure for you. That will eliminate that one awkward part for me using the Hassie. With the Hassie, I have a separate light meter, or I just use my phone with a light meter app, and then I can set it. So you're not going to do anything fast. I mean, it takes a few minutes for me to take one picture between getting the exposure, setting the exposure, and focusing and composing. Composing in a square format is also very interesting because that's the only format you have, right? Um, you can't like adjust it like you can in a digital camera. But anyway, yeah, I like it. I'll after I develop a roll of film on it, I'm going to try and do that today, um, and do some prints. I want to do a color roll also before I do a video on it, but we'll see. After I've developed the black and white roll, I did some 400 Tri-X. I'm going to think about if I'm ready to make a video for it or not. Because maybe shooting with color might be better. Because if the black and white roll, if I mess up the developing on the black and white roll, I'm going to shoot a color roll, and if I mess that up too, then that tells me maybe something's wrong with the camera. Because it'd be very unlikely for me to mess up developing two rolls in a row. One maybe, but not two in a row. Not that it wouldn't be the first time, but because I got 100 days to return the camera if there's a problem, because you know they're all used, right? But I haven't shot a full roll through it yet, so we'll see. Um, oh wow, some Gear Matters type feedback here. I assume you guys have all read it. And oh, this is about. I was ranting about the Hasselblad and I got way behind on the chat again. I'm looking at 11:13 a.m., which is like 30 minutes ago. Yeah, I discovered that getting rid of fine details and exact colors makes portraits better. Yep, I believe it. And it, like I said, that's the one thing I learned from that portrait session class was it got me thinking about things like that. Maybe accurate color is not the way to go, right? And oh, here's the reference. Memento was a movie where the man lost his short-term memory and had it put tattoos on his body to remember things. Okay, I haven't seen that movie. But that is almost exactly like a Doctor Who episode. Uh, I think with David Tennant. But they would write things down on their arm. No, it was something. There were these creatures that made you forget, and they would every time they saw one, they would put a line on their arm, like count 1, 2, 3, right, to see how many times. So Doctor Who apparently ripped that idea off Memento. And I thought that was so clever, but they just ripped it off from somebody else, apparently. Wow. I find that a lot in sci-fi. A lot of stories that I watch, I'll say they did the exact same thing in Doctor Who in the 1970s. There was an episode in Star Trek, and I was like, Doctor Who did that exact same. I mean, it was almost a parallel between what Doctor Who did, as Tom Baker Doctor Who episodes. They do them 5 at a time or 6, whatever it is, to the finale of Star Trek. It was almost identical. It was embarrassing how they ripped Star Trek Next Generation, ripped off Doctor Who. I mean, it was just, I just can't believe it. Anyway. And then Andrew says gear does matter, but not as much as the manufacturers want you to believe. I would agree. It's all the context, like I talked about earlier, right? And the gear doesn't matter, and then all of Micro Four Third ambassadors lose their sponsorships and switch systems. Even Joe Edelman tells you, oh, well, Joe is not technically switching systems. He's just adding the Sony to his gear, right? And I think he's doing it as an educational. He did it as much as okay. The way I understand is Joe, and you can watch his channel. He explains it himself much better than I would. But he's not getting rid of his Olympus gear. He's still using it, but he's adding the Sony gear to his toolbox, so to speak. And the reason he left Olympus or did not want to be an ambassador, he left Olympus, right? Or OMS, because OMDS is not focusing on portrait photographers anymore, which is a mistake. They're focusing on in my opinion, is a mistake. They're just focusing on wildlife, sports, action type stuff. They should have had them left their audience very broad, but I guess whatever their marketing team decided that was the way to go. Um, and they didn't pay me for my opinion, so it doesn't matter, right? But you have to watch Joe's channel or Facebook. He explains it. You can hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Don't take it from me why he bought a Sony. But from what I saw, it was uh, just adding to his existing toolbox. So you don't believe him. So you saw the thing about being Olympus wildlife. I believe him though. Joe is a very Joe has a very what's the word I'm looking for? he's been doing photography for 50 years. So to him, gear, is is not the most important thing, right? He can get a great photograph no matter what gear he's using. So he chooses his gear very when he chooses his gear, he's using all of that experience that he has in choosing his gear. By adding Sony to the list to his toolbox, he had a very specific reason, right? Um, and it wasn't because gear matters, in my opinion, but there was a reason he had for it, and that'll have to flesh itself out over time. What he's doing with his Sony gear, I don't know exactly. I have some ideas about why he bought a Sony, but I don't want to say anything ahead of him or mischaracterize why he bought a Sony. It's best that you just watch his channel and get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. I would just say that right now he's saying he's not getting rid of his Olympus gear. He loves his Olympus gear, and he's adding Sony to his toolbox. I think because he can. Yeah, he has Olympus tattooed. Somebody asked him if he's going to get rid of it, and his answer was no. Olympus, that tattoo represents an accomplishment, right, in his life. It means a lot more than just a brand. It means something to him personally, and that's why he has that tattoo, which I thought was that sounds reasonable to me, right? Um, oh, John has the answer here. The trivia answer is the Panasonic 14 millimeter f2.5 wide angle converter, a total of 125 grams, and turns the 14 into an 11. You can't buy a DMCG. Oh, only used. Well, that's that was a trick question. It's not really the lens. It's like two pieces, a lens plus an adapter. But okay. If I was more familiar with Panasonic gear, the 14 millimeter 2.5 would have come to mind, but then I would have eliminated it because it's not 12 millimeters. But I would have never thought of adding the adapter. That was a trick question. But at least I got the Panasonic part right. But I got the fact that I got the Panasonic, the autofocus, but I missed the zoom. You suggest you said it's a prime, the 14. But okay, good trivia. I like it. I like that. TCM is Turner Classic Movies. Yep. I haven't watched that channel in a long time. From Randy here. um, don't forget to press low. Okay, thank you. Rob's getting heated up. I think skill set is a big issue. Most people with a good skill set can use any camera and produce a good image, but a newbie, then camera doesn't matter. Yeah. Yep. That sums it up. Yep. Learn the sport first. And that's true. I mean, a better camera is not going to make you a better photographer, right? If you're just starting out. Or just buy a Mac and not worry about drivers. That's funny. I only bought an iPad Pro because I had to. I was forced to I think I've talked about it, but I haven't even used it for the reason I bought it for. I use it mostly just to read email and comments and stuff. I don't do anything with it. But I got the iPad Pro, expensive thing. Dumbest thing I ever bought. Well, not the dumbest thing. I mean, I use it, but. And Marco has my answer here. Game ready drivers and studio drivers. Thank you. I couldn't remember the name. Studio drivers are actually the same. The studio drivers are just updated less often and go through more testing for creative apps. Okay. I see. So basically, the gaming driver may potentially not work with a creative app because they didn't test for it yet. But the studio drivers, they did test for the creative apps. So it's just an older version of the gaming drivers. Okay, that's interesting. Well, I'll go through the GeForce experience, and whatever driver says it works with PhotoLab, I'll do that. Oh, that's cool. Well, hopefully you vlog it. I'd like to see it in a vlog. But at the very least, we'll see the pictures on Flickr, right? Oh, Lars is here. Says, I recently skipped Capture One. With Lightroom now have a working method to handle local adjustments. The features are now leveled. Since I have to use Photoshop, it's also a big cost advantage to go with Lightroom. Yep. Yeah, I only use Lightroom Photoshop because I have to. Nothing I have found can replace Photoshop with the layering things that I can do in it. Hasselblads are for two hands or a tripod. Yep. There ain't no one-handed operation with that thing. That's for sure. And is the WoW camera actually the Wear or Wear camera? Why don't I make a new MFT camera in 2022? I'm sure they will. Lauren is cracking me up. A Hassel camera. Man, that is definitely the right name for it. It is a hassle, but in a good way. And then John Matthews was the one to ask about the lightweight lens, Panasonic 2.5 with the DMC GWC1 wide angle converter gives it 11 millimeters and weighs in a. Yeah, trick question, right? But I love it anyway. And the Mikey, it has to be autofocus, but the answer's already been given, so. Wally's here. Hey, Wally, how's it going? And Alec, good to see you. Yeah, I know. And Rick says, portrait photographers, remember that the Hasselblad medium format camera is the classic camera for studio portraiture, ideal for waist level shots. Looking slightly up is recommended. Yeah, I don't know much about Hassel. All I know is they used it on the moon, or a version of this. I did try to find a connector, in my bag. I thought I had a sync cable because I did want to try some flash work with this as well. But I'm going to have to buy a sync cable that fits this lens. But let me see if my first roll even comes out. Maybe this shutter is bad in it or something. I don't know. We'll see. Lars says, I'm happy we left the film error and no reason to look back. Yeah. I mean, I do it just to have a different experience. It's definitely the hassle. It's definitely a hassle, though. But I just like it. I might get tired of it. It might be just a phase, But it's been a few years. I enjoy shooting film time to time. It's just a very nostalgic feeling when you hear that shutter clack, that mechanical sound, Although DF is very close. That thing is really loud when it clacks, man. I don't know who's. I was watching some review and they said, "Oh, the shutter's not that noisy." I'm like, "You're out of your mind. That thing clacks." And Doctor Who seems to be in the news every. Oh, really? I haven't seen anything in the news. I don't follow Doctor Who much. Um, since it got off the air here in the U.S., I'd have to pay for like I'd have to pay for cable or something. I don't have cable. I'd have to pay for something to get it because I used to be able to watch it. I used to watch it on something, and then they took it off of that. Like I think it used to be on Netflix, and they took it off of that a few years ago. So I just bought the season. I just buy the Blu-rays now. Definitely, I agree, Wally. One Solutions, they definitely are missing the boat with street photographers in particular, portraiture work too, right? Um, oh, oh, okay, I have to deal with that. Sorry, I got a text. That's disturbing. Wow. Okay. Um, let me finish this chat, then I have to go. Great lenses. David Crooks is here. Good to see you. Um, I need to talk about David Crooks's book. I'll do that on. I'll do that this Sunday. I don't have time now. I meant to do it today. Okay, use it for. I don't have the pen for my iPad. But that makes sense. Makes sense. Does the camera have moon dust? Lauren's referring to my Hasselblad because it was on the moon before. Um, oh, that's a good idea, David. Why don't we schedule for next Thursday then? Because this Sunday I'm having Peter Forsgard on, and next week Thursday would probably be better. Then we can devote more time to your book rather than just being kind of a side note to Peter being a guest. I'd rather just have you by yourself, and we can talk about the book and all the things you've been doing. So, all right, I have to go. I'm so sorry, but yeah, it's been a couple hours anyway. But thanks everyone for joining me today. Look out for this weekend, Sunday live stream with Peter Forsgard, and next Sunday will be the fourth annual online meetup with 6 other photographers. There's a link on my page now for it. And all right, thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you again soon. Mm.